they must believe they've got the goods on this. And as you said, they've been incredibly deliberate. We've been expecting this indictment really since the first raid, much less the second raid. And they really must have their ducks in a row here.
We're going to continue our discussion about the arrest and indictment of Sean Diddy Combs with an attorney who knows a thing or two about representing high-profile individuals. Ben Chew, who famously represented Johnny Depp in his civil lawsuit, is going to come on and give his perspective on this brand new case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, so we're still breaking down the news of the arrest and indictment of Sean Diddy Combs. It's still kind of remarkable to think about. We had been covering this since November of 2023 when he was sued by Cassandra Ventura, and all the way now, he has now been indicted. And this is not a surprise. We knew this was going to happen. There was reporting for months that this 54-year-old media mogul would be the target of a criminal investigation, that his homes in LA and Miami, they were raided by federal agents back in March. A grand jury in New York was impaneled. He had been hit with numerous lawsuits alleging sexual assault, sex trafficking. There were rumors that those alleged victims were cooperating with federal prosecutors. And then last night, Sean Combs was arrested out in New York City. The reporting indicates that he was taken into custody last night by federal authorities at the Park Hyatt Hotel, that he had actually come to New York knowing that these charges were about to come, knowing that he was about to be indicted. And remember, this comes after a grand jury indicted him, and that is what we're talking about. That a grand jury indictment was unsealed today. It is a 14-page filing. Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, charged Combs with 3 counts. Racketeering conspiracy, so essentially that Combs operated a criminal enterprise that engaged in sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction of justice. He's not individually charged with those crimes. These are known as predicate crimes that are part of the overall criminal enterprise, and that he used certain methods like coercion, threats, physical violence, sexual violence, guns, drugs, to do what he wanted. And a large discussion of this is about freak-offs, when he would allegedly threaten and lure women to engage in sex acts with male commercial sex workers. We'd heard things about this before in other lawsuits, but now that is making up a criminal charge. Now, he's also charged with sex trafficking of a victim by using force or coercion or fraud to have that person engage in commercial sex acts. He is also charged with transportation of people for purposes of prostitution. So those are 2 separate charges right there. And these are very serious. It's our understanding, racketeering could be 20 years in prison. The sex trafficking could be 15 years to life. So he is essentially looking at, if he's convicted, maybe spending the rest of his life behind bars. That's how serious this is. So with such a high-profile case, a celebrity defendant, I want to bring on somebody who knows about this. I want to bring on friend of the show, Ben Chew, who famously represented Johnny Depp, not in a criminal context, in a civil context, represented him in his lawsuit with Amber Heard. But Ben, so good to see you. I want your perspective, in a minute about representing high-profile people that are in these kinds of situations, legal situations. But before we do, this indictment, was it what you thought it was going to be? Was it worse? What did you take away from it?
Well, Jesse, thanks for having me on again. As we were discussing before the show, it was very bad, but it was also conspicuous for some of the things that it didn't have. Some of the allegations that we'd heard of about minors were not included in this indictment, which is curious. But what is in the indictment is devastating.
And you know what's interesting about it is that this indictment, it's comprehensive, but it's bare bones in terms of you don't know what the evidence is. In a separate filing, the prosecutors filed, it's a letter to the judge asking for why they think Combs should be detained before pending trial, denied bail. And they say, we've interviewed 50 victims and witnesses. We have looked at all this surveillance footage, all of this digital evidence, And you could see how they've built up a substantial case, which I guess is not surprising why it took so long for an indictment to come forward. What I do think is interesting is this probably wouldn't have happened without the civil suits first being filed, right?
Yeah, that's two great points. One, I think clearly the civil plaintiffs were cooperating with the Southern District. And the other point you touched on a little earlier, I think we all expected more of a speaking indictment. In other words, more, more than this fairly bare bones approach. But it sounds like the prosecutor took a very strategic approach and purposefully kept this a little less detailed and gave himself more flexibility, while in the letter making it clear to the court why he should not be allowed free pending trial.
As you can tell, since this Combs news broke out, I've been talking with a lot of really great legal minds out there about the case, and you're watching it right now, what to expect and so on. It makes you think it's really important to have a really good lawyer, and when you need one. So how can I talk about that without calling out Morgan & Morgan, our amazing sponsor, America's largest injury law firm? Look, if you're injured, this firm with over 1,000 attorneys may be who you want in your corner. Multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. Their clients get a dedicated army that includes a legal team, case investigators, paralegals, customer case specialists. There's no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. And the whole process can be done straight from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. In this indictment and even in the letter, there's no mention of a Cassandra Ventura or Rodney Jones. None of these alleged victims are named. It's more broad that it's multiple victims and that he would do this. And it's a pattern, alleged pattern over years. And when you see a racketeering case like this, when you hear a criminal enterprise, that is now becoming, in a way, a more common charge. I mean, we saw it against R. Kelly. We're seeing it here. What do you make of that specific charge? Because it actually makes up the majority of this indictment.
Yeah, they must believe they've got the goods on this. And as you said, they've been incredibly deliberate. We've been expecting this indictment really since the first raid, much less the second raid. And they really must have their ducks in a row here.
Let me ask you a question. And yeah, there was raids simultaneously. There was one in LA and one in Miami. But let me ask you this: in terms of the civil cases, they're still ongoing, except for Cassandra Ventura. They're still ongoing. How does this indictment affect the civil cases?
Great question. I've got a similar situation right now involving. We have a client with a case against A$AP Rocky. What often happens in the civil cases is that the defendant in the criminal case will move to stay the civil action on the grounds that he or she might incriminate himself if he or she had to testify in a civil deposition. And it is often the case in California, for example, where we're litigating a similar matter, that the courts will stay the civil actions. Now, that may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it may also depend on how far along the civil case is. So, for example, if the civil case is pretty far along, the civil judge might be less inclined to stay the case pending resolution of the criminal trial.
Because in a civil context, a defendant could be compelled to testify.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it could compromise his constitutional rights in the criminal context. And I think judges tend to be very sensitive to that possibility. Now, on the other side, you've got the civil plaintiff who has other witnesses she might want to have testify, and their memories fade as time goes on. So they're competing public policy interests there.
I was just thinking about something. Assuming for a moment that the people who've sued him are making up the majority of these cooperating witnesses, when they take the stand in a criminal trial, in order to cross-examine them, they'll be cross-examined about their civil suits, right? Like, you have something to gain with my client being found guilty, right? You're suing him, right? That's a common cross-examination tactic, right?
Oh yeah, no, no, and I think that I think doubtless they will try that. I don't know how far that gets you because I think that the natural answer to, well, you're just here because you want to get money, the answer to that is going to be no, I'm here because your client damaged me.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it is a good line of cross-examination, but I think it's one that will have a real answer, which is no, I may be suing him, but I'm really here because he committed, he damaged me, he committed this crime against me.
Do you know what was significant to me reading this indictment and also thinking about it in general? Is one thing to say somebody sues somebody else, lower standard, lower burden of proof, it gets through. We have to see what a jury will decide, or maybe a judge. But for prosecutors who are filing criminal charges against Sean Combs, where it seems they believe what, at minimum, one of the accusers has to say. Like, if you're looking at this, it's clear to me. I don't know if it's clear. It's clear to me they believe Cassandra Ventura, even though she settled the lawsuit with him. The fact that they mention the freak-offs is what she mentioned. The fact that they talk about the 2016 video of Sean Combs allegedly beating Cassandra Ventura in that hotel elevator bank hallway, which we all saw, was published by CNN. They mention it in the indictment. The fact that you have prosecutors believing the civil claims of these alleged victims, that is really significant. And I think also, if she hadn't settled the case, or with respect to people who haven't settled the case, it might make their claims so much stronger and would actually maybe, I don't know, persuade a defendant to try to settle it quickly, or maybe it would make, I don't know, it's just something I thought, that you have prosecutors now believing this enough to substantiate criminal charges.
That's a great point. It's really going to help. Obviously, Cassandra's case is over and settled, but it certainly will be a boon to the other civil plaintiffs. That's a really strong point.
What do you think about the idea that he is the only one charged right now? Damian Williams, who is the United States attorney, said that, look, nothing's off the table. They might hit him with more charges. They might charge other people. But it seems like when I'm reading this, a lot of this is based upon witness testimony of people who were in his orbit and not just the victims or the alleged victims.
Yeah, I think it reflects a desire to keep it as simple as possible, because it's a high-profile target, and they want to make sure they have a very clean shot at it. I think that's one of the reasons it took them so long to do this indictment and why they made it sparing. They just didn't want to make any missteps, and it doesn't appear that they have.
Ben, what are the complications of representing a celebrity like this? And I think it could be the same, and whether it's a criminal context or a civil context, you're going to need a jury. You're going to need to have them look at him a certain kind of way, despite what the allegations are. I imagine representing somebody as high profile as a Sean Combs, or even, a Johnny Depp, even though we're talking about two separate things here, it's more challenging, right? And what do you do?
It is more challenging, and my partner Camille Vasquez and I, dealt with that with Johnny, and we dealt with that with some of our other clients, because you're not just dealing with, in this case, criminal charges, or in other situations, in Johnny's situation, a civil case. You're also dealing with the brand and reputation of the client. So to the client, that may be as important as the civil case or the criminal count. I think as lawyers, I think, Jesse, you and I would err on the side of preserving the legal rights. But when you're representing somebody like this, you have to bear in mind that they're constantly thinking about their image, their brand, and you have to really talk that through with your client in a way that you don't with an ordinary client who's charged criminally is only going to be concerned really with what's before him, whereas with somebody like Diddy, you're dealing with with his brand. Although I think these particular charges are so serious, if I'm representing him, the only thing that matters is going to be trying to extricate him or mitigate the punishment that's coming his way, because he's not going to have a brand if he's sentenced to life imprisonment.
Yeah, you can already see the damage he's taken from a reputational point of view, a financial point of view, just from the allegations. That's, you put that to the side. The idea of how would he even get a fair and impartial jury? These allegations are stunning, and then you have to convince this jury that not only he's not guilty of this, but you're also asking them to enter a certain kind of world, right? I mean, I was talking about this before with Brian McMonigal. You could say Sean Combs, he never even had any of these parties. He was never engaged in any of this. He was nowhere near it. Or you say, yeah, he was partying. He had people around, but they consented to everything. He never forced anybody to do anything. And you're inviting people into this world of celebrity that they might not be used to. And that can work for your defense, right?
I think it absolutely can work for your defense, and I think you really have to own that. I mean, putting aside the issue in the criminal case of whether you're going to have your client testify, I think you have to own that. You absolutely, in light of the evidence you know is going to come in and you know is already out there, you are going to have to explain to the jury, this is not an ordinary person. He has more money than you can imagine. He has a lifestyle that's different. You may not approve of that lifestyle, ladies and gentlemen, but that having that lifestyle is not a crime. I mean, he really has to own as much of that as he can that is not criminal. Obviously, so it's a needle that needs to be thread. But I think to the extent that his counsel can own that and have his client take some responsibility, I think that that enhances his chances. I think the problem here is we've seen that video. That's not just having a nice lifestyle or partying. I mean, that's physical abuse, and those kinds of videos, they speak a thousand words, and they're unbelievably damaging.
And I'll tell you, I'm going to pull something up right now. In the government's application or the government's letter to the judge saying that the bail should be denied, setting aside devices seized in connection with the defendant's arrest, the government has obtained over 90 cell phones, laptops, cloud storage devices, as well as over 30 electronic and storage devices, including surveillance system. And the electronic data comes from the defendant himself, as well as co-conspirators, victims, and witnesses, and chronicles much of the defendant's criminal activity as it occurs. So that's really bad evidence when you think about it. I did want your perspective on what he's been doing. So the idea, and this is something that's mentioned actually in his application for bail, where he says one of the things his counsel said is he has been cooperating. He came to New York. He didn't run away. He came to New York, knew the charges were happening. He was apprehended and taken into custody. What do you think about that counter argument? Because his team has said we're going to put together the proposed bail package, a $50 million bond, co-signed by him, his mom, his sister, the mother of his oldest daughter, and his 3 adult sons. It's going to be secured by the equity in his property in Miami, Florida. Home detention, his passport will be surrendered. The government said that's insufficient. They said, look at the charges, look at the weight of the evidence that I just mentioned. They said they have allegations that he and his associates were trying to tamper with witness testimony last year so that they wouldn't cooperate with the government. What do you take away about who has the stronger argument in terms of bail?
Well, I think his counsel has done the best they possibly can. I think bringing him there voluntarily is very smart, starts them out on the right foot. But I think the last thing that you just mentioned, the interfering with witnesses,
That's the
that,
allegation, yeah.
yeah, if that's true, or I should say, if there's real indicia that that happened, I think that might tip the scales in favor of not letting him out pending trial, because I think And you know this, I think judges take an extraordinarily dim view of that. And that might be the factor that tips the scale against him. But I think as far as a tactic, I think it was very smart to do what they did and to say, look, he's here. You didn't have to track him down. He's got a real defense here. He's doing everything right, at least right now. I'm not sure it's going to be enough at the end of the day.
I wanted to end on this point. Look, he's innocent until proven guilty. I want to make that clear.
Absolutely.
These are allegations. He'll have an opportunity to fight these allegations. When we say victims, they are alleged victims at this point. But I do want to make clear about something. Assuming all of this is true, this has to be an incredibly difficult time for those people. Now they reported it to police. Now they're cooperating with prosecutors. Now they may have to testify. Their stories could be amplified even more so. And they'll have to testify in front of a jury, which is never easy, and face cross-examination. As somebody, and look, his team will have an opportunity to cross-examine them. But, your client famously went on the stand and explained the abuse that he says he endured. How tough is this for these people to now be a part of this next step in the legal process?
It's extraordinarily difficult. It was for Johnny, and it will certainly be for them, because there shouldn't be, but there is a sense of shame. When you are a victim, there is part of you, and I've represented victims like him and others. There is a real sense of shame, which isn't rational. I mean, if you're a victim, you shouldn't feel shame, but they do. And I think that is part of the pain that they are going through. But it is, to use a cliche, it's somewhat of a journey. I think once they make the decision that they are going to step up, I think once they've made that decision, I think most of them stay quite strong. And by the time they're actually doing it, they're doing it for the right reasons. So
Yeah.
I think it is painful, but I think you'll see a lot of strength if they do have to testify.
Ben Chu, so good seeing you. Thank you for
Great
coming
to see
on
you.
as we break down this new news. And I look forward to continuing the discussion with you, my friend.
Thank you, Jesse. Anytime.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.